It's nearly 3 o'clock. Thanks everyone for sticking with us. I was just thinking of how ridiculous it is to need an hourly comfort break when we're talking about women that would sometimes work from 6 in the morning till 3 in the morning without snacks and toilets and stuff. Our final speaker of the day is going to be Emer Mary Morris, who's a participatory theatre maker and writer and cultural worker. And when Emer made her journey, which she's going to tell us all about in a minute or so, right down the herring route down the east coast, it was sort of right in the middle of one of the various lockdowns, and we've tried to be quite strict at the museum about everything and keep it to be and maintain a safe environment so that we could stay open when we could be. And after Emer left, I realised I hadn't even sort of offered her a cup of tea. It was so strange. In the past, you would just say, come into the tea room, we'll get the coffee on. And she was in the middle of this very long, arduous journey down the coast. And I'll never forgive myself for not offering you a cake, Emer. It was just, we're kind of like in masks outside, not touching anything. So sorry about that. But I'm glad that you're still friends with us, and really excited to hear about your journey and then what you've created and what that inspired afterwards. So I know it is just bang on 3, but I'll stop rambling on and hand over to you now and hope that all goes well, as it did for Meg with the technology. Thank you, technology gods, for that.
Great. Hi, can everyone hear me? First step. Great. Hi, thanks Jen and Kathy, and thank you to Margaret and Meg as well. It's so inspiring, and like there's from those talks, but also there's so many experts here. I've just been watching the chat kind of popping up and being really excited, and I want to speak to you all. Hang on, here we go. Let's go. Can you see that all right? Wait, you see that all right? Yay. Okay, brilliant. Great. So thanks for having me, everyone. I'm going to take you on a little journey through some of my research process. Unlike the other speakers we've heard from today and plenty of other people here, I'm not an expert, and this has really been my like learning journey. So yeah, I'm just going to take you more through that, and I'm going to play you some audios. So yeah, this is me and my bike Tina on the herring run, exploring the histories and work of women fish workers. This is a picture of Lillian Balocca, who some of you may well know from, who wasn't a herring gutter necessarily, but is well known as one of the lead organisers of the headscarf revolutionaries in Hull in 1968. And Big Lil, as one of the leaders, was one of the organisers who campaigned to improve the safety conditions on the trawlers after 2 Hull trawlers went down in really quick succession in 1968. They took a lot of like direct action, and she was a fish worker herself. So that's sort of an example as well of one of the things I learned, people I learned around on the way, and some of these incredible figures involved. And this was just a bit of my like impetus of setting off. Was around in 1936, at the peak of the herring season, there were 3,000 women fish workers went on strike over paying conditions in Great Yarmouth, and they shut down lots of herring trade, the entire herring trade at the time in Great Yarmouth, until the demands were met. And I was very inspired about hearing about this, and wanted to know what we could learn from it, and how that was different from the experience of people doing fish work today. So just a little brief overview. I'm Emer. I'm a theatre maker and producer and cultural worker, and my work that I make is participatory and celebratory and platforms the experiences of mobilised communities and those whose voices are often excluded. And I'm queer and neurodiverse, which also informs my practice and my research practice. So yeah, the work I make is varying from musicals to murals, and I've also built a giant womb, award-winning womb. Anyway, back to herring. Yeah, early last year I was being supported by Arts Council of England to develop my creative practice and was exploring the identities and work of women workers. And when I heard about the herring workers, it resonated very hard with some of with a seasonal job I have done over the last 10 years, which is involved through a crew of women who really honed their craft and have quite mean business heads and incredibly self-organised, and it's an itinerant working job. And you know, it wasn't gutting fish on the quaysides, and isn't that, but I felt kind of connected and was like, wanted to know more about these workers and what we could learn from them. And already at that point, I was my seasonal work, because of lockdowns, wasn't available to me, and I went and got a job in a fish factory, which was for economic reasons as well as for my interest of wanting to know what the work itself was like and to understand the current labour context of fish processing. Yeah, and the people I met during that and the things I learned have like informed my practice quite a lot. So then I started a journey, and I wanted to follow the herring run down the east coast. So I started at the top of the Shetlands, and in the same way that the herring workers would follow the shoals down the east coast, gutting and packing, I followed the route along the coast. They travelled by train, as has been talked about earlier today. I travelled with my bicycle Tina Tourer, and later was accompanied by a knitted herring. But yeah, me and Tina went down the coast and met people along the way to find out more about the history and what work is like now. So we set off from the top of National Cycle Route 1, which, if there's any cyclists here, the National Cycle Route 1 goes the entire way down the east coast, and I would highly recommend it. It was very convenient. So yeah, we set off, and what I was doing was audio recording people that I met who were up for talking to me, and then daily uploading that to a blog called Following the Fish Workers, which you can have a look at if you're interested. Setting off top of Ernst. Yeah, and I was incredibly lucky that throughout the journey, I got to meet with residents, fishers, fish filleters, packers, factory workers, families of herring workers, historians, artists, heritage volunteers. It's also where I've met, there's people here today like Jan and Ian and Margaret and Jen, who I met, and Gail, who I met on that route. A little bit about the day-to-day of that would be that I would wake up in the morning and eat loads of bananas and eggs and oatcakes and pack down my tent and cycle to the next fishing port place, which maybe was 20k or 50k away, and I'd go and potentially meet people at the Heritage Centre with very little notice. People were very accommodating, yeah, I would learn about the herring workers from before. I'd also then go to the quayside, I'd go to fishmongers, I'd go to the fish market and speak to workers who were doing that work now. Then I might just nip into a cafe and use their Wi-Fi and recharge my batteries, and then I'd carry on cycling for maybe another 40k or something, and set up my tent, upload what I documented from the day through using my hotspotting from my phone, and like fall asleep and then go to sleep and repeat. It was really magic, and I feel incredibly lucky that I've got to do this process and this journey. So I'm going to play you just a little extract. I made there's a lot of documentation. There's quite a lot I'm going to do with it. This is just a 17-minute podcast taster from the journey, which is also available on the website. But I'm just going to play you a little moment and show you a few pictures, if it works.
Come on, you fisher lassies, it's come awa wi me, fi Ken, Bulgan, Gamry, and fi Inveralakey, fi Bucky and fi Aberdeen, and all the country round, where a wat got the herring, where a wat Yarmatoon. You rise up in the morning with your bundles in your hand, be at the station early or you'll surely have to stand, take plenty to eat and a kettle for your tea, or you'll surely die of hunger for you get to Yarmouth Quay. The journey it's a long un, it takes a day or twa, and when you reach your lodging sure it's sound asleep you fa, but you rise at 5 with the sleep still in your ee, you're awa to find a gotten yards along for Yarmouth Quay.
Right, so on the ferry to Shetland. Just about to leave Aberdeen. In 13 hours time we will arrive in Lerwick on mainland Shetland. It's very exciting. On deck in the sunshine, going to be looking out for all sorts of birds and dolphins and killer whales. When we get to Shetland we will then head to the other islands, get to the top point to start the journey of following the fish workers. I'm looking forward to hopefully meeting some people who do fish work or have relationship to the herring workers from before. Thinking about my learning question for this time, which is what can I learn from fish workers about time and value? And that's an overarching question that's going to be in my mind, that I'm going to be working through and chatting to people about elements of that, both in terms of economic labour and other labour and time and the sea, and fish. I'm very excited to be heading to the northerly point to start the journey. I think that suits. That's our toot toot set off.
What's your name?
Jimmy Lawrence.
Jimmy Lawrence. And what were you saying? So we're at Balta Sound.
Yeah, this is Balta Sound here. They call it Balta Sound.
Yeah.
It was the biggest herring station in Europe around 1900. The population on Unstead, including the herring workers, about 10,000. The herring stations all the way along both sides of Balta Sound here. And you could walk across the boat. The boats were so many boats, when they're all tied together, you could walk across the boat from one to the other.
Because there's so many boats?
Yeah. Very busy at that time, yeah. And then it faded quite rapidly after 1900. It died quite rapidly, yeah.
Do you think many of the women from the island left and to go all the way down?
Oh yeah,
coast?
they followed the fish, yeah, all the way around.
Following
Yeah.
the fish?
Yeah, they were worked to the bone. They were hard work it was,
Yeah.
but they had good times as well. Yeah.
10,000 people.
Yeah.
And what is it now?
650. So it's a big contrast. And, hopefully it'll increase, maybe if we get some space centre here, it might help and might get a lot more
Space
people
centre?
here. Yeah,
Is that what we're going to do?
hopefully, yeah.
Wow.
Up at Scott, up at the northerly point there.
Wow, from herring to space.
Yeah, yeah, big contrast.
Cool. I'll leave it there. But sorry about my ramble at the beginning. I was deciding whether to come back out of the pictures or not. But yeah, so you had to hear that again. But that was, you did hear the Hugh McCall song that Meg mentioned earlier, and also Jimmy Lawrenson on Unst, speaking to them. So I did make it to Great Yarmouth, 1,700 kilometres cycled later and a month later. I can't really distill all the learning that I've done in that time. I'm going to show you some, going to talk about some of the artistic outputs, but just to kind of to cover a little bit, is that I learned obviously a lot about the gritty day-to-day of doing this work, and about the impact this huge economy had on each location and the subsequent impacts of the trade dying out. I learned about the herring trade's complicity and integral function in the slave trades, in terms of feeding enslaved people. I learned what it is to do fish work today. I learned about tastes changing and about the sizes of lobsters changing, how to gut a fish, about rhythm and physique, about the joy and pain and frustration, and obviously the absolute grit needed to do that work. I learned about the dangers of being a fisher, and I learned about the dire consequences of the conditions in the accommodation for the women workers. I learned about the class dynamics and about geographical rivalries, about collectivising childcare, about solidarity. I learned about vaccinating fish. I learned about the struggle and repeated strike actions and how landmark they were at negotiating contracts. I learned about 3-day millionaires and about the stench. I learned about red herring. I learned about the changes that come from offshore oil. And I learned about wind as a new economy, about Ganses. I learned about how important how these important histories are very much kept alive by volunteers in heritage centres up and down the coast. And I learned about gender and class and how they interplay in the lives and works of those often unsung collective struggles of these women workers. And just to say, there's a contribution of lists of people who've contributed to that podcast on the website as well. So there's just another picture of Lillian in the other headscarf, revolutionaries. So to speak briefly about guts. So guts, what this started off for me is a project called Guts, which is a multimedia theatre project which focuses on uncovering and celebrating fish workers and the communities in which they come from in the past, present and future. So using verbatim audio history, participation, action research, song, dance and radio play, this project seeks to tell the untold stories of people involved in fish work up and down the east coast of the UK. Straight off the back of the cycle, I made an experimental live radio play called Guts that we presented at Camden People's Theatre in October. So this radio play used the real words of fish workers I met. It used historical accounts of the herring workers' strikes, particularly from the work of Sam Davies, and other work as well. It was performed by 4 actors, 2 of whom I met on the journey, and 3 of whom are from the East Coast, from North Shields, Scarborough and Great Yarmouth. And it was live, it was performed in front of a live audience, and it was broadcast live around the UK and up to people I'd met and partners and organisations on the East Coast, as well as we had some listeners in Spyways, Australia, which was really the work centres on the 1936 strikes. There was other strikes as well, but this one obviously was really big. On what it is doing some factory working and issues of supply chain, doing fish work today, and some imagined futures about maybe when there's a black market in fish. And it uses verbatim fantasy to look at issues of gender, class and collectivised labour. So we can have a little listen to a moment from Guts.
Thursday, 22nd of October, 1936.
The strike spreads and fast.
Yard after yard joins of girls.
Not girls?
Sorry. The workers flood to join the strikers, downing tools from the yards.
By 5 p.m, the whole of the train's intricate machinery is brought to a standstill.
The curers know, even if the strike is short-lived, this is serious.
They are bricking it.
6 p.m.
More like 7.
Oh yeah. All right. 7 p.m. A growing crowd of cheering girls sweep round the loyal yards and call all the workers to join in.
We link arms, 10 deep, then march along the wharves and fish market, shouting a battle cry of, "We want a shilling and a barrel!"
9 p.m. We get word that a score of workers have resumed gutting in one of the curers' yards.
What?
Aye.
Millions of strikers.
Millions?
Sorry, hundreds of strikers swarm into the road and batter on the doors. We besiege the yard.
Stooping, we pick up herrings and hurl them.
Aye, dense wee fellas.
A full-blown bombardment.
Herring flying everywhere.
It's wild.
At 9:30 p.m, a policeman, mounted on his high horse, arrives.
Baton in hand, horse rearing.
The shouting crowd scatters.
The police tender barges through, taking away the 6 remaining workers in the yard.
Our boos follow it. Boo!
Back to the factory.
Thai grills.
Me and Darry are on the Thai grills. Big small boss is there, on the floor. He's got someone in a suit with him. Fancy pants from head office into the factory. People notice without looking up, work faster in a frantic way. People mess up. Me and Darry are heads down, concentrating hard.
You see here just how many phases have to happen. Here, you see they are weighing out every spoonful of sauce to 29 grams.
Right.
That has to be done individually into every tray, and if we are sending out 600 or 800 boxes a day,
I see, yeah.
you can imagine how many hours.
Yeah.
Oh, we used to do it with a piping bag, and that was an absolute disaster. You can imagine the mess.
Oh, yes, I can.
So just some adjustments to switch over some of the functions.
Definitely.
So let's look over here.
They come close enough to lean over mine and Darry's shoulder.
You see, this is what I am talking about. You see, every individual piece of paper has to be placed in the bottom of the trays and then on top of the burgers.
Yeah, that is a lot of work.
Yes, and it's something that could be done so easily differently.
It's very time consuming.
Oh, hello.
Surprise, the blue hat speaks.
I didn't see you there.
They watched me lay out papers. I'm sweating.
Mechanic, where is the mechanic? Ceiling 2 is down again.
We better just nip out of the way over here.
Marisha.
Yeah.
Big small boss.
Yeah.
What'd he say?
Just that we should be replaced with machines.
What?
Nothing. He's just impressing fancy pants from head office.
Okay, we finish these 2 boxes and then maybe we get a tea break.
Yes, Shipco.
Shipco, Marisha.
Okay, that'll do. So as you can hear from that as well, there's like jumping around between different settings, and yeah, that's a bit of the Guts live radio play experiment. If you want to listen to more, you can. Moving on, that was in October, yeah, I think it should be obvious. I mean, yeah, be obvious to some people here that within the current context of Brexit and climate change, it's a very difficult time nowadays to be involved in fish work in whatever particular job role. And rural coastal communities are some of the most affected by the geopolitical and socio-economic issues, whilst simultaneously being pretty unsupported by government. In November, I was asked to do some evaluation work around COP26 conference in Glasgow, around what the impact was on civil society. And I took on the work with the agreement that I would do some of my own research, which was to go and speak to some of the fish workers I've spoken to before, and people in fishing communities about what they felt about COP and what the impact was. My angle was not an environmentalist one, but more of a worker solidarity one. But obviously I was still kind of reticent because of the levels of agenda and blame which can be involved. I'm going to play you a little extract from that, from going to speak to people then, that this has not been played before, and yeah, is something. Anyway, I'll let it speak for itself. I'm sorry about the quality of some of the sound if people are struggling to hear it. What do you make of it? COP?
Well, it's for the good, isn't it? So I'm pleased there's people doing things like that on behalf of us.
Yeah.
Having a climate conference. Do you feel engaged by it?
No.
And what is there anything that they could do to make your life easier and your work?
Yeah, more money. I'm earning less now than I was 20 years ago.
Like?
Well, these greedy gaffers are living in big houses, driving 6 different cars a week, cheering it out a bit more.
My skill set's fish. It's not saving the world when it comes to climate change. So yeah, I mean, anything that we can be told would help us, then yeah, all the better. I mean,
the seasons for the fish don't seem to be anymore, and they're blaming the water warming up and dolphins and whoever else seems to be out there now, which is a shame. But you know, it's quite a sounds like quite a big conference. And how long is it on?
No one at COP knows these kind of places exist, do they? They're far removed from this kind of thing. They're in an ivory tower with, they're just not. They don't know about places like this, do they? I don't think the people in the suits will save the world. It's the people on the front line, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of fishermen turned up in the top.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of fishermen do that.
Because of Brexit?
Yeah.
I mean, Brexit, yeah. We've got a big troll, the K killer, right, but he won't go out.
We're being used as a chess piece in their game of chess, that's all we are. We've got these big companies not really doing anything about it, and all they want to do is make us pay for it. It's everything. They tell you don't drive, don't fly, and they're all doing exactly that.
And is someone involved in like the fishing industry? Do you feel like people involved in the fishing industry are being engaged in conversations about?
Oh, you think about it. How are they going to run fishing boats on diesel, on electric boats?
Yeah.
How are they going to run them? It costs too much money to transfer a trawler, something like that, to electric, won't it?
Yeah.
Just like a car, isn't it?
More information for the man on the ground, and that needs to filter from right at the top. I think at top levels you can have an awful lot of things in place, but if your man on the ground, the feet on the ground, don't know what can or cannot, or what is or is not being done, then you're sort of wasting your time.
Anything you want to say to people involved in environmental campaigning?
Yeah, you've got to do something, don't you? You've got to do something, because we have messy environments up, haven't we? but it closed down again. All these big companies don't seem to do a great deal with it. It's all pushed on to the normal working person every time.
It wasn't for the prices being so good, the fishermen would be fucked, put that like, you know what I mean? Like, say 4 years ago, your brown crab was £1 a kilo. Just now it's at like £2.50 again, so you can make it £1 off it, catching less, you know what I mean? But before it was bulk to make money again, just now you need the good prices and the catch to make money again. So if the prices went up a bit, I dare say people would start taking some creels in, whereas the ground's not getting hammered so much, you know what I mean? But
the thing is, we need to do something to sort of improve matters, you know. Like I say, long term, I've got children, and for their children, yeah, so absolutely.
I'm Leanne Cordner. I've worked in the fish, well, I've worked in Old Smokehouse for nearly 19 years, and previously in another yard when I was younger, when I was 17. I worked there for 7 years. So I've been pretty much in the fish all my life.
Locally, we obviously deal with fish from Iceland and from Norway, from the Faroe Islands, so climate change would be a big hindrance to us. If it affects the oceans, which you know I'm led to believe it will, and adverse weather, you know, we haven't seen a lot of fish from Iceland in the last few weeks because they've had bad weather, which is this time of year they do get that.
The problem I have, I mean, this isn't my own cynical view with what's going on up there, is that all them so-called whale leaders are basically being lobbying for big companies who pollute the planet more than anybody else.
But basically, so basically the British public was sold a dream that we'll get our fishing rights back, and Brexit was all sold on fishing alone, in my opinion, and it actually couldn't have been any worse. It's been devastating for the UK fishing fleets. It was exactly the opposite of the dream that was sold, and Brexit's a disaster for the UK fishing industry.
And love working here, learnt a lot over the years. My family's all fishermen, were. So my husband, he was a fisherman for 30 years. He's in the oil now, due to the decline and with politics and whatnot, but otherwise no.
There's no fish at any rate, and the industry's just on its knees, and if it gets any worse, there'll be no fishing industry in England at all. Simple as that, you know.
Do you think that do you feel like your voice or voices of other people who do fish work are represented at this COP?
No, really, the government don't listen. The government do what they want to do.
Hello, my name's Josh, and I'm a Grimsby fishmonger. I want to see more aquaculture, I want to see more line catching, and I want to see a reduction of shellfish that has been troll caught.
Try and get more young people, like, say, we were willing to give the young lads, fathers, wanting to do the work, grants and that kind, and like train them up and give them courses. And I dare say, as people who's scared to ask people, if they awarded that out to the youngins who were willing to do it, and I dare say a lot more youngins would come into it and that again. But like, the fishing's inexpensive. You make good money, but it's expensive to run a boat, you know what I mean? So you've got to take it odds and evens. So, but no,
some more support.
Yeah, support. A bit more support for the fishermen, and I dare say it'd go a long way.
It used to be.
Hey, thanks for listening on that. Some of what you heard as well, I'm sure you can hear for yourself, is around the kind of anger on exclusion and discontent, as well as fear about the future. One of the things I thought was really like interesting and important was the desire for engagement with powers and from the climate movement. I used these findings in the report, in the work that I was doing, only so far as to use them to illustrate the failure of climate organisations thus far, the climate movement more generally, at kind of creating dialogue, meaningful dialogue with people involved in the fishing industry. And also I'd just like to it's worth noting that my own surprise about the strength of feeling around climate change. I think being so used to the issue being kind of co-opted by a louder middle class meant that I had internalized some of this and was kind of shocked about some of the raw emotional impact of the climate emergency was having on older fish workers. And the rest of that recording, you hear some more of that raw emotion. Yeah, and it was the first time that I personally felt a very strong kind of connection around climate change. So just a little recap. I'm going to speak a little bit about what next. Is around, yeah, like obviously the theme of resistance is huge for me, and it's a part of my interest. And the herring workers as seasonal itinerant workers was such a force to be reckoned with. And other elements that have been spoken about by Margaret and Meg, such as the collectivised childcare and a strong working identity. And then, yeah, how they self-organised on pay and conditions. And the celebration through what Meg's been talking about as well, through song and dance and the knitting, and clearly there's like changes within while the herring workers were still going, and then since then, particularly themes around abundance and scarcity of work, of fish, of money and time, both on a day-to-day basis and throughout the decades and centuries. The social economic factors and geographical inequalities, market forces and climate and Brexit, not to mention COVID, have obviously all played like huge roles in a changing nature. What next? The work that I'm doing, Guts Continued, aims to address some of the things that I've spoken about by creating a platform to celebrate the work and culture of fish working communities, stemming from the fierce heritage of the women herring workers. So 2022 and 23 will see a series of action, research, residencies, participatory workshops and community interviews to develop a new theatre piece and audio series which seeks to platform the voices and legacies of fish working communities. We will then make a play which tours the East Coast. And yeah, I'm taking a intersectional feminist approach in terms of my research and theatre making. So the current filleting industry and a lot of the voices you just heard is very white working class and male dominated. And so my efforts also go into platforming a diverse group of voices, particularly those of the migrant labour force, which make up a lot of kind of factory workforces, as well as those involved in other parts of the fishing labour force, such as on trawlers. And I'll continue to work with lots of collaborators, including fish workers as consultants. And yeah, I'm always I'm eager for further collaborators and partners and links. So please get in touch with me you've got a story to share. And yeah, I just want to say thank you. And also I've also shared a lot of like pictures and things today, and which have largely all come from, you know, some from individuals and some from heritage centres. So if you want track of any of those, I can just contact me for them. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I just also wanted to open out. I guess I'm interested to hear from folks here. Yeah, what are the big learnings for us from fish workers about time of value? It could be about anything. But yeah, thanks very much. And yeah, there's my contact details as well. That's me.
Thanks, Emer. Thank you so much for that great presentation. You and Meg and Margaret have just dedicated so much to really getting into the nitty-gritty of the fishing community, sort of going directly to the people, to the places. Amazing journeys really that you've all had, going to all these communities and bringing the stories together, and also looking to the future and what's happening now. So I think there's probably scope for another whole afternoon anyway, just with the talks that we've had. But I know that you want to continue with your research and to speak to people in the industry now. So hopefully there'll be some people listening that might get in touch with you. Thanks for sharing all your contact details. I know that Matt had his hand raised earlier, Matt Topsfield. I don't know if anyone else has got questions that they'd like to ask in person. We've got, again, lots of really positive comments and questions that we've been chatting away while you've been busy sharing your screen, Emer. So I'll hand over to Kathy and she can let me know if there's any questions.
I guess we'll start with Matt. Would you still like to raise your comment or question?
Sorry, that hand raise was my iPad being overzealous. I don't know why it automatically raised my hand. Sorry about that.
No worries. Would anybody else like to ask a question in person before we have a look at the chat? No? Okay. I think the first question that came up was from Jan. You might need to correct me if I'm reading this incorrectly, but she's written, interested to hear about the connection of fish feeding enslaved people and the herring.
Yeah. Yeah, great. This is stuff which was raised to me particularly through the creation team at Timespan in Hemsdale. Yeah, and this is where the evidence of me not being a historian really comes to light. Maybe Margaret or someone else can also jump in with specific details, but around much of the barrels of herring were exported to the colonies to feed enslaved people on plantations. And yeah, and there's also links in terms of the heritage of that around how as a like West Indian food coming back as a saltfish might have links to that. I mean, that's more I don't know about that being the case, but yeah, the complicity of the herring trade and obviously of the powers that be, as we know, as great colonists, yeah, using the labour in this way.
Okay, thank you. And we've also got a message from Sarah that reads, thanks, Emer, really great to see the journey from the great island of Unst southwards. Two things. I'm wondering about the health issues for the women working in the fishing industry. and just wanted to say that there was a smoking house on the headland in Hartlepool when we first moved there in the late 1980s. I wonder how many of these signs of the fishing industry still exist in Scotland and England. And I will add that there's quite a bit of discussion in the comments about what little remnants of the industry you can see around the coast. But yeah.
Yeah, so much so. Particularly when I mentioned around the health, that was also knowing, learning from Margaret Ritchie as well around the actual dire conditions as well in some of the camps, which is also one of the big reasons why many of the herring workers would, lobbied at government, was around the conditions, the living conditions in some of these, in some of the camps, particularly in Great Yarmouth. But maybe Margaret wants to speak a bit about that. Or maybe it's something to come back to.
I think some of the worst conditions would probably be in Shetland, because it was the wooden huts where the boats were kept, and everything got moved out, and they were pretty basic, no running water, no toilets, until I think it was either the late 1930s or early 1940s before they actually got running water and toilets in them. Maybe in this bigger towns like Yarmouth and Lowestoft, they would actually be staying in digs in people's houses, which, and there again, they would be quite basic. For example, members of your family could get moved out while you made money renting a room out to the herring women. They would have one room to themselves. And usually what happened is, if there was any floor covering, people would lift the floor covering, because then they didn't want everything covered in herring scales every night.
It made me think of one of the stories of putting up the newspaper on the walls in the accommodation, so that just to try and keep the stench or the dirt, the filth of the guts away from the walls in the accommodation for other people staying at different times. And I just saw something on the chat as well around the Wollago steps as well in Caithness, which is, it's really fantastic. Like those steps to visit. I love visiting them, and they were rebuilding, they were restoring some of them actually when I came through. But yeah.
I'll tell you what I'll do, Emma. I'll stand at the top of the steps and you can run down them, and I'll hold your coat at the top.
Perfect, Margaret. But yeah, there is definitely, I feel I was incredibly lucky through my process, on my journey, that I met so many people who are local experts and have a lot of local knowledge and expertise, and could take me around places that you might otherwise not know, and then you'd see a little sign and be like, oh look, that old smokehouse, or oh look here, this part of the quay here, you can tell that this is exactly where the gutting happened. So again, I think it's a lot through people that knowledge is kind of kept alive.
Any more questions in person or comments for Emer?
Well, I think there's quite a lot that resonates with, if you look at, one thing I didn't cover in too much detail was the political actions of the women. And I think that is, the roots of that is obviously, you're not working as individual women for a start, you're working in a 3-person crew. And that's, so you're working in a team, and you're all travelling in groups of probably several hundred from your own home area. And then when you do go down to the big towns like Lowestoft and Yarmouth, which people naturally do, keeping within your own dialect group and so on. And there's obviously a lot of resonance there about the actions of, I mean, I've actually covered found lots of stuff in the Hansard in the parliamentary records, because they would go and complain to their MPs about things. And I had one particular MP who took on board the complaints because they'd been kept waiting for 20 minutes, waiting for a train to return home. And it always makes me laugh, because I think it just makes us look like a bunch of wimps. I mean, we wouldn't probably even complain to the rail company, far less get our MPs. Our MPs wouldn't ask questions like that in Parliament. I mean, the nearest we would get to expressing our annoyance is probably to text a friend. But those women got things done, and there's that sense of solidarity. And I'm just wondering, listening about some of the women who are working in the fishing industry now, if there's not so much of that. But then I'm talking about somebody who lived through the Thatcher era, and we became very much focused on individual people rather than group identity. But I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there.
Okay. Thanks, Margaret. I've just seen a message from Jan in the chat around saying, just wondered whether you'd come across Black women working in the fish industry in the 19th and 20th century. And a reply from Davine saying, David Alston from Cromarty has covered this in the course of his wide-ranging investigation to slavery connections in the Highlands, which is really interesting to me, because so far in my research I haven't found it, and I'm like, I haven't found evidence, and I'm sure this exists.
Yeah, I'm always looking for that too. You know, because there were sometimes men who weren't white who worked on the boats. Like I came across a reference to, there was an Indian cook singing Indian songs while working as like the cook on the boat. But like you, I haven't come across that yet. So thank you, Davine, for sharing that reference. I'm going to follow up on that.
Yeah, it's really helpful.